You wake to the smell of bread baking and the soft hum of your mother's song. The air is gold with morning light, your brother chasing chickens outside. Then, thunder, though the sky is clear. Hooves, shouts. The first scream tears the air like cloth, and by the time you reach the door, your world has already been erased. If you find yourself drawn to these buried truths, take a moment to join our growing circle of history seekers. Like this video, subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Whether you're in Istanbul, Lagos, or London, every comment connects this global archive of memory, where voices once silenced find echo again. The Ottoman Empire, vast and dazzling, was built on contradictions: faith and violence, art and bondage, enlightenment and terror. Behind every marble mosque and jeweled dome lay a machine of acquisition so vast it swallowed entire nations. Its gears turned not on metal, but on flesh. By the 16th century, the empire had perfected the procurement of human life, transforming abduction into administration. The first link in this system began far from Istanbul's glittering skyline, in villages where the border blurred between Christian and Muslim lands, where mountains hid what maps refused to show. Ottoman raiders moved before dawn, cloaked in silence. They didn't come for land or tribute. They came for the living. Children were prized above all. They were malleable, blank pages upon which new identities could be written. In the Caucasus, Crimean Tatar horsemen were known as the collectors. Each spring, they rode north through the Carpathians and into the Polish-Lithuanian borderlands, where morning mist concealed their movements. Villages awoke to the crack of muskets and the smell of burning thatch. Those who ran were hunted through fields. Those who hid were found by dogs. Within hours, a community of hundreds could vanish, its absence marked only by smoldering chimneys and scattered shoes. By the time survivors crawled from cellars, the raiders were already gone, leading coffles of captives southward. The term coffle came to mean a human chain, neck irons linked by wooden yokes, wrists bound with cord. Witnesses described the sound, a dull, rhythmic clatter of metal on bone as the column moved. Mothers who refused to march were cut down before their children. Infants were left by the roadside, their cries fading behind the caravan. Weeks later, those same children arrived in Ottoman territories, silent, half-starved, their eyes glazed with shock. In towns like Kefe and Trabzon, markets buzzed with the sound of negotiation. Traders shouted prices, scribes dipped pens into ink, and the smell of sweat and salt water filled the air. Here, human worth was assessed like livestock. Teeth checked, limbs inspected, complexion compared. The youngest fetched the highest sums. Their innocence was a currency of control. Each sale was recorded with bureaucratic precision. In ledgers written in Ottoman Turkish, scribes noted the name of the buyer, the price in kurush, the origin of the captive, Circassian, age 8, Greek, fair-haired, untrained, Tatar girl, strong for domestic labor. Stamped beside each entry was the seal of the Qadi, the imperial judge. What had begun as terror now wore the mask of legality. This was no chaotic slave raid. It was a state-sanctioned enterprise. Taxes were levied on each transaction, import fees collected at ports, and transport licenses issued by provincial governors. Even the death of a captive had paperwork, a notation of loss of property for insurance reimbursement. The Ottoman bureaucracy, famed for its efficiency, treated human trafficking as another branch of commerce, no different from grain or silk. From these ports, the captives were distributed along imperial arteries. Some were sold into domestic servitude in Anatolia. Others were shipped across the Bosporus to Istanbul's Avret Pazara, the women's slave market. Foreign envoys described it with horror. Rows of veiled girls seated on wooden benches, guards pacing between them with canes. Buyers murmured approval or disdain. "She is too pale," one merchant was heard to say, "but her hair is gold. The Sultan's court will pay well for that." The youngest captives were often absorbed into the palace education system. To outsiders, it appeared a path of elevation. Slaves transformed into courtiers, sometimes even concubines of influence. But beneath the silks and lessons in poetry lay a cycle of conditioning designed to erase memory. New names were given, languages forbidden, old faiths stripped away and replaced with the empire's creed. A child's history could vanish as easily as ink washed from parchment. Occasionally, records preserve fragments of those lives. A ledger from 1574 lists Aishi, formerly Katerina of Dubrovnik, purchased for 3,200 kurush, later assigned to the imperial kitchens. Another, Fatma of Circassia, 12 years, sold into the harem schools. Their fates diverged, some rising to power within palace walls, others dying unnamed in the corridors of obscurity. Each entry a testimony to the empire's paradox, that bondage could masquerade as advancement. Diplomats from Venice and Genoa wrote of the same scenes with clinical fascination. One envoy, Pietro della Valle, remarked in 1614 that the markets were so orderly one might think it an affair of trade, not tragedy. He noted the silence of the captives, the way they sat motionless, as if rehearsed. That silence wasn't discipline, it was despair refined into etiquette. What made this system endure wasn't just cruelty, but normalization. For centuries, Ottoman law declared the enslavement of non-Muslim captives permissible under the concept of ganima, spoils of war. Over time, this doctrine stretched far beyond battlefields to encompass raids, trade, and even the children of the enslaved themselves. A faith that preached mercy became, in practice, a mechanism for exploitation, justified through ritual and ink. And so, the morning raid became an empire's heartbeat. The cry of a mother became a tax record. The stolen child became a line in an account book. Civilization advanced, its cities gleaming, its scholars writing, its artists building. All while its foundations rested on the silence of those who vanished at dawn. When the empire's historians later chronicled its glories, they began not with the raids, but with the victories, the battles, the architecture, the sultans. The ledgers of the enslaved remained hidden in archives, gathering dust. Yet each mark of the pen is a whisper that refuses to fade. For in those pages, every forgotten name still waits, not for rescue, but for remembrance. And beyond the ink, you can still hear it, faint like hooves on distant ground, the sound of a morning that never ended. The air inside Topkapi Palace quivers with the scent of rosewater and secrecy. Light drips through latticed gold screens, striking jeweled cushions and polished marble as if reluctant to touch the floor. Somewhere, unseen, a lute trembles, a fragile melody that breaks each time the wind slips through the corridors. Servants move barefoot, their silence heavier than their steps. Behind every curtain, a heartbeat waits to be heard. No one outside these walls knows how many women live here. Some say hundreds, others thousands. The empire's chroniclers recorded numbers but never names. They called it the harem, from the Arabic haram, meaning forbidden, sacred, off limits. Yet within its perfumed stillness lies a machinery of control as intricate as the empire itself. At dawn, the youngest are woken by the slap of cold water across their faces. They are not yet concubines, merely candidates. They come from the farthest corners of the empire, Circassian, Georgian, Greek, Bosnian. Their tongues are stitched to new syllables, their gods replaced with the Sultan's will. In the training chambers, mist rises from copper basins as tutors instruct them in how to pour coffee, dance, and bow. Every gesture must be measured, every smile calculated. To misstep is to disappear. One girl, no older than 14, drops her silver tray. The clatter freezes the room. A matron in emerald silk, the Hazinadar Usta, keeper of discipline, turns slowly. A trembling hand betrays a trembling soul, she says, voice soft as a blade's edge. The girl kneels, trembling harder. A single drop of pomegranate juice stains her cuff, crimson against white. "Clean it," the matron whispers, "before it becomes your mark." Beyond the training chambers lies the Hall of the Favorites, a place spoken of in both envy and terror. The walls there gleam with mother-of-pearl inlays, but the air is heavy, almost watchful. Here, beauty is both weapon and curse. The women who live within this gilded labyrinth rise and fall by invisible rules, each governed by favor, rumor, and survival. Travelers who glimpsed these interiors through veiled intermediaries wrote of music and laughter, of jeweled fountains and silk cushions. But they missed the silence between those sounds, the way it swallowed laughter whole. A Venetian envoy once noted, "The women smile with their eyes alone. Their mouths are servants to command." He never saw how those eyes dimmed after years in captivity. Power in the harem does not belong to the most beautiful. It belongs to the most cunning. The Valid Sultan, mother of the reigning ruler, wields authority that rivals viziers. Her word can exile, elevate, or extinguish a life with the tilt of a finger. From her private apartments, she orchestrates alliances like a chess master moving invisible pieces. Behind the lattice, her spies listen to whispers carried on the scent of jasmine. But even the Valid is a prisoner of ritual. Every movement, from her meals to her prayers, is scripted by custom. She, too, once came here as a girl with no name. The silks she wears are both crown and chain. At night, the palace shifts. Eunuchs patrol the corridors, keys clinking softly at their belts. They are the guardians of this world. Men stripped of desire turned into instruments of order. Their faces are unreadable, their eyes trained to see everything and nothing at once. One passes the Hall of Mirrors and pauses. Inside, a favored concubine practices a dance for the Sultan. Her reflection multiplies endlessly around her, each copy smiling a little less than the last. The Sultan himself appears rarely, a figure more myth than man to most. When he enters, time seems to hold its breath. Perfumed lamps are lit, and the floor is covered with silk carpets woven in prayer. The women line up, eyes downcast, awaiting a glance that could alter the rest of their lives. Who among them remembers her mother's face? A chronicler once wondered. And who among them still dreams of escape? Sometimes the harem gives birth not only to heirs, but to political storms. The rivalry between Mapekar Kosem Sultan and Turhan Hatich became legend. A shadow war fought not with swords, but with silken cords, poison, and secrets whispered through keyholes. One night in 1651, the corridors filled with the scent of burning oil. Kosem, once the most powerful woman in the empire, was strangled in her own chamber by the eunuchs she had commanded. Her body was hidden beneath a heap of carpets, as if even in death she must remain unseen. Outside, dawn broke as usual over the domes of Istanbul, washing the palace in pink light. The empire's scribes recorded the event as a transfer of influence. No mention of murder, no mention of the silks that bound her wrists. By the end of this chapter, the viewer has seen the harem for what it truly was. Not a sanctuary of pleasure, but a theater of submission, a system designed to transform human beings into ornaments of empire. Each silk curtain hides a story of survival, and every song that drifts through the corridors carries the echo of a name erased. Somewhere in the labyrinth, a girl hums a tune her mother once sang to her before she was taken. The melody trembles, unsure of its own memory. Outside, the call to prayer rises over the Bosporus, and the silk curtains ripple in the wind, like ghosts trying to breathe. The palaces are empty now. The fountains that once whispered over marble basins are dry, their echoes swallowed by dust. The wind moves through broken lattice screens like a ghost remembering its shape. Inside the shell of Topkapi, shadows cling to walls that once shimmered with silks and secrets. No footsteps, no songs, only the faint breath of centuries exhaling. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1922, the world applauded the end of tyranny and the birth of a republic. But history, like architecture, leaves foundations that cannot be seen from the street. Beneath the triumphal proclamations and nationalist rhetoric lay the unspoken truth that for hundreds of years human lives had been the mortar of the empire. Records in Ottoman archives, bound in brittle leather, list them with bureaucratic calm. Item 452, Circassian female, aged 13, purchased for service. No names, only classifications: beauty, skill, obedience. In one ledger, a scribe had drawn a tiny rose beside an entry. Perhaps out of pity, perhaps irony. The ink has faded, but the cruelty has not. When the palaces emptied, many of these women vanished into the alleys of Istanbul. Some married quietly, some fled across borders, and some were absorbed into families who never spoke of their origins again. Yet their stories ripple outward, in the color of a child's eyes, in the inherited hush around dinner tables, in the silence that follows certain questions. A British diplomat in 1910 wrote of visiting a former concubine in Thessaloniki. She was then an old woman with trembling hands who refused to give her name. "All I remember," she told him in halting Turkish, "is that I once belonged to a voice behind a curtain. When it stopped calling me, I ceased to exist." He recorded her words in his travel notes but left her anonymous. One more forgotten face in an empire of millions. Across North Africa, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, generations carry the residue of that system. Entire communities descend from people whose ancestors were captured, sold, or absorbed into Ottoman households. The genetic memory persists, even when the history was buried. Who claims ownership of suffering when the oppressor's name has been lost to time? In modern Turkey, fragments of this past surface unexpectedly. A deed to an estate reveals the word "kari," slave, beside a great-grandmother's name. An old photograph turns up in an attic. A veiled woman, her eyes defiant, her posture regal despite the chains of custom. In Bosnia, elderly women still whisper of devshirme, the child levy that stole boys from Christian villages and turned them into janissaries, the empire's most loyal soldiers and its most tragic sons. Each revelation cuts through the myth of Ottoman grandeur, the domes, the calligraphy, the poetry, to expose the human cost beneath the ornament. For every verse of Rumi recited in palaces, there was a servant polishing the marble with bloodied hands. For every sultan immortalized in oil, there were women erased from the canvas. Even in abolition, the echoes continued. The end of the slave markets did not end the hunger for control. It merely changed its disguise. The routes once used to traffic bodies through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea became arteries for labor migration, prostitution rings, and modern trafficking syndicates. The names changed, the ships changed, but the commerce of flesh remained. In Cairo, 1933, a police report describes a raid on a brothel where women from Circassia, Sudan, and Anatolia were found under contract. They spoke no Arabic. Their papers were forged by men who claimed to be their guardians. The officer who wrote the report noted bitterly, "The empire is gone, but its habits remain." The camera lingers on the ruins of Dolmabahce Palace. Tourists take photographs beneath chandeliers once lit for sultans who never saw their own servants' faces. Outside, the Bosporus glimmers, indifferent. The city hums with life, trams rattling, vendors calling, but beneath it lies a geography of silence. Historians sift through archives, diplomats' letters, and fragments of testimony, piecing together the empire's human architecture. A court case from 1906 reveals a girl suing for her freedom, invoking Islamic law itself as her defense. "If the Sultan is mortal," she told the judge, "then who owns my soul?" Her words survive only as a transcript, her fate unrecorded. Yet her defiance lives, flickering like a candle in a palace of darkness. So what remains of the empire that once spanned 3 continents? Not its armies, not its banners. Only echoes of songs sung in captivity, of footsteps through marble corridors, of generations born from silence. The Ottoman Empire is taught in textbooks as a marvel of administration and art. But the truer empire, the empire of forgotten faces, survives not in monuments, but in memories too painful to name. Somewhere in a narrow street of Istanbul, an old woman lights a candle for her grandmother whose name she never learned. The flame dances, reflected in her eyes. Outside, the call to prayer rises again, mingling with the cry of gulls over the Bosporus. History continues, but the ghosts remain, unseen, uncounted, whispering in languages the empire tried to erase.